Victory, happy Father's Day. I want to welcome you and thank you for joining us here today. We're so excited to be able to gather with all of you here online. As others continue to join us, let's quickly go over what today's service will look like. Here in just a few moments, we'll kick off with a fun Father's Day video and go into a time of worship. After that, you'll have a chance to partner with us and what God's doing here at Victory and in our community through online giving. Then we have a special Father's Day giveaway moment that you won't want to miss. We'll hear a relevant message from Josh, then we'll respond to the message with one more song and take communion together. If you haven't prepared that ahead of time, please be sure to do that now. Finally, we'll wrap up with an invitation to next steps. Now, if you're joining us, we want to know you're here, so we ask that you would please check in. We'll be posting a link down in the chat for you to do so, or if your phone is available and you have the Victory app, you can check in on there as well. If you're watching on your phone, don't worry, you'll be able to do that after service as well. If you're a first-time guest with us today, welcome and thank you for joining us. We are absolutely honored that you're joining us today for the first time, and we're praying that God uses today's service to get you connected. A link to our connection card will also be posted in the chat. Please fill that out and we'll get back with you as soon as possible. No matter what platform you're watching on right now, we want to encourage you to engage with us in the chat and with others who are watching with you. You can talk about what's happening, react to a point from the message, discuss what you might be learning, and ask questions. We also have some online hosts and Next Steps volunteers in the chat that are ready to answer your questions about Victory, to help you find out your next step, or to pray for you at any point during or after today's service. Hey, one last thing. Before we start our service, we encourage you to download our Victory app if you haven't yet to make your experience with us today even better. You can find our message notes, online giving, resources, and so much more on the Victory app. And thanks for joining us today, Victory. We're glad you're here.
If you're a dad, you're not afraid to work hard.
Never give up.
Never compromise.
And the best dads always look for ways to get better.
I'm looking for something to energize me.
I'm looking for something to push me further.
And I'm looking for something to go with these nachos.
Dad Fuel, the energy drink designed just for dads.
So I can finish the fight.
So I can finish the race.
So I can finish mowing the lawn. And later on, I might watch some golf.
The fuel dads need to do the things dads do.
Climb the highest peak.
Go the furthest distance.
Check the scores. Read the newspaper. Give amazing relationship advice. Why are you crying? You should really talk to your mother about that.
Dad Fuel comes loaded with taurine, ginseng, and 100% of your daily recommended value of Hi Hungry, I'm Dad.
I start every morning with the 4 Ds. Devos, donuts, Dad Fuel, down blanket. Breakfast of champions, baby.
Now available in 4 bold flavors: Original Orange, Grow Model Raspberry, Growmaster Mango, and I thought I told you to take out the garbage grape.
You can't touch my passion.
You can't touch my drive.
And you definitely can't touch my thermostat. No way.
So whether you're thirsty for victory
Or just plain thirsty. No, seriously, it's empty. Can I get another one?
Dad Fuel.
Because I am fearless.
Because I am unstoppable.
Because the players on TV aren't gonna yell at themselves. Come on! Throw the ball!
Well, hello, Victory Online. So glad that you've gathered with us. Happy Father's Day. I just got finished drinking my Dad Fuel, and I'm ready to worship with you all. I hope that you're ready. We invite you to turn up the music and sing along with us. Here we go.
Don't give up.
Nations bow, mountains shake at the sound of just one name. Over all, Jesus reigns. I know. Nations bow, mountains shake at the sound of just one name. Over all, Jesus reigns. I know.
Our nation is a critical moment for the church. And in 2020, there have been wildfires, pandemics, lockdowns, isolation, loss of life, violence, riots, rage, division. Even an asteroid is headed towards Earth. But if you're a Jesus follower, you know from history that this is when the church does its best work. In fact, the original version of Christianity brought change, brought hope, brought life to dark places. Their faith actually impacted their life. Their faith led to the life change. Their faith changed the world. There's always been a remnant of Jesus followers who have been the most progressive, sacrificial, compassionate, innovative, loving, generous people in the world. Because the message of Jesus and the mission of Jesus and the grace of Jesus, it impacted their heart. And when we sacrifice and when we give, we get to be part of that. When we give, we get to be on the front lines of ushering in faith, hope, and love. Our generosity positions us to be used by God. So if you call Victory your church, would you consider, if you've never given, would you just consider a one-time sacrificial gift? If you've done that before, we're asking you to consider a reoccurring gift. And if you've already taken that step of faith, we would like you to reconsider a reoccurring sacrificial percent. See, we're at a critical time in the history of our church, and we, as Jesus followers, we need to rise up and step up to help us as we live out our vision of connecting people back to God. Would you join us?
Happy Father's Day, Victory! We hope you're all having an awesome weekend, and for some of you dads, it's about to get even better. You may have seen on social media or received an email about our Father's Day giveaway, or maybe you were invited here today by somebody else who did. We don't know, well, whatever, we're glad you're here. We have 3 prizes to give away to 3 lucky dads this weekend. Are you ready to find out what they are? I am. Just kidding, I already know. Prize number 1. What was it again? Prize number 1. A Craftsman hedge trimmer. Hit that heart button if you're excited to win this hedge trimmer. Prize number 2. A Craftsman weed whacker. You got some weeds that need whacked? I know I do. Hit the like button if you want to win that one. And finally, our grand prize. A Pit Boss barbecue grill and smoker. Make sure that you react down there and let us know what you're excited to win. So that's what's up for grabs. Now, here's how you can enter. We're putting a link in the chat right now. You can fill it out as a dad or for your dad or any father figure in your life. Go there, fill out the contest form. It should open in a separate window for you so that you don't get kicked out of the service. But if you're watching on your phone, we would advise waiting until the service is over just to make sure. We will leave the link open for 5 minutes after the service ends so that everybody who's here with us right now has a chance to enter. Now, this link will only work during our live online services this weekend, so if you're watching this on demand right now, you just missed it. I'm already smoking stuff on that grill. Stinks to be you. But we like to have fun stuff like this every now and then, so make sure you try and watch live with us whenever possible. Again, if you're watching live with us right now, go ahead, click that link. Get your dad or father figure in your life entered to win one of those really cool prizes. Winners will be drawn at random, so everyone has an equal chance to win. We just ask that you be able to arrange pickup for your prizes on our campus. We will draw our winners after all our services have finished this weekend and post the winners around 2 p.m. on Sunday, June 21st. So go ahead and click that link. You can't win if you don't enter. Good luck and happy Father's Day.
Hey, happy Father's Day Victory. If you think you know where we're at, let us know in the comments or give us a like or a heart. I'm so excited that you've joined us today. I'm so glad you chose to spend Father's Day with us. I want to welcome all of the fathers, the grandfathers, and the amazing men who stepped up to be fatherly figures in other people's lives. We are so honored that you've chosen to spend your day with us. And we want to celebrate you. We want to encourage you. We want to salute you. And we want to give you an opportunity to win one of our amazing prizes. Now, to do that, you can enter as a dad, or you can enter for your dad. And to enter, just click the link that's provided at any time throughout the service. Now today, we've chosen to be stationed right outside Camp Atterbury, named after Brigadier General William Wallace Atterbury. This facility opened way back in 1942, and 78 years ago, Camp Atterbury was originally opened to train men for war. And I think that's appropriate for Father's Day, because sometimes being a dad, it's like you're in a fight. It's like you're running an obstacle course. It's like navigating a minefield, and it's an important tactical mission. And sometimes being a good dad, it's just difficult. That means that you got to prepare yourself for war. But many of the men know this, that before you become a father, there's no training. There's no boot camp. And so where we're stationed today is to encourage you and to inspire you and to lead you and your family. And I have a special message directed for fathers today, but I believe that no matter where you're positioned in life, you can get something out of this message, because young men, one day you might get the opportunity to be a father or a fatherly figure. Now, for someone in your life. Now, ladies, before you say, what's in it for me, and click the thing off, even if you're a lady, you probably are dating a man, you're married to a man, you want to marry a man, you gave birth to a male, or you're trying to raise a male, or maybe you've got to school with a male or work with a male. The reality is we all have to deal with men. And Camp Atterbury is a training ground for both men and women, and it supports the National Guard. You probably knew that. It hosts the Joint Maneuvers training. It serves as a railway transport hub. They even have a SEAL team stationed right here. In fact, this facility now services all of the branches of the military, and so we're stationed here today simply because no matter how you came into this moment, today's message is an all-skate. So it's designed to inspire and encourage every single person under the sound of my voice. But since today is Father's Day, I need to recognize that the idea of manhood and masculinity has been under attack. See, our culture does not celebrate manhood or masculinity. And in our culture, when it comes to masculinity, the reality is that our culture would like to teach you that sameness is the goal. That sameness is the goal. And there's a real reason for that. And I think part of the problem is when it comes to manhood and masculinity, no one really knows what it's like to be a man. The definition of manhood. I mean, if you listen to the music or watch the movies in America today, manhood is measured not by a man's character or the promises that he's kept, but by how many women he's conquered. Deals he's done, fast cars he's driven. Manhood is measured not by his ability to raise and teach and invest and inspire his own children, not by the sacrifices he makes to make this world a better place, but how he invests his money, how many raises he gets, how big his vacations are, and the size of his truck. So in our culture, manhood and masculinity, it's under attack. That's the culture we're in, and they like to use the term when it comes to the male gender, simply this: toxic masculinity. And even though Webster's dictionary has not defined it yet, this is what people think of when they hear toxic masculinity. Behaviors driven and measured by inappropriate expressed violence, an unhealthy pursuit of sex and status, with an avoidance of accountability and emotional vulnerability. And men, we can't play dumb and say, there's nothing to that. I mean, there's a reason people believe that definition, but what the world needs now, more than ever, in these divided states of America, is real men to rise up and fight for true masculinity. And guys, there's no age limit to this. You can be 8 or 88. And you have a role, that you have a responsibility assigned by God to your life. And so while the whole world is talking about this issue, saying we all need to be the same, you need to realize the diversity in which we were created is important to God. The diversity is important to God. That's why God didn't just create one bird and call it quits. Like, that's why we have over 10,000 different species of birds. Diversity is important to God. But in our culture, it's pushing sameness. Now, I'll agree, the world does not need any more toxic masculinity. I agree with that. But part of the problem is the opposite of the word toxic is harmless, powerless, and impotent. And men, I don't know about you, but as a man, I don't want to be known for that. And it seems like there's bad options all the way around. Or maybe, how about this? The opposite of the word masculine is feminine. And this is not an agenda, that's just grammar. Like, hear me. I know that people have been hurt by toxic masculinity, and I'm not trying to ignore that. And as you may think this Father's Day, the world would be a better place if men surrendered their masculine power and their masculine strength and all act the same. But I have 132 throw pillows in my house at home as proof that we ain't the same. We're men and women, we're different. And we don't see things the same way. And that diversity when lived out in a right and true and healthy way, it can be a really, really good thing. But to force someone to become something that they were never created to be, it just never ends well. And so men, young men, ladies, the diversity in which we are created, it's important to God. Our diversity gives us a role. Our diversity gives us a responsibility. And one of the responsibilities fathers have been given is by their actions and by their words and by their attitudes is to reflect God. And because when Jesus would teach and present, the number one way that he wanted us to interact and to see God was as a father. In fact, 189 times in the gospel, Jesus tells us when he refers to God as Father. More than any other concept of God, it's as Father. All over the gospels, Jesus says, my Father, our Father, your Father, and just plain Father. And man, that means that when your kids, when they learn about God, they should be able to look and say, wow, that's what my dad, that's what God's like. And like when we teach your kids about how God is kind and truthful and loving, they should be like, you mean like my dad? Caring like my dad? Strong like my dad? Forgiving like my dad? And I'll be honest, that's a lot of pressure. I mean, that's why Satan targets us specifically. I think he looks at us and thinks, hey, if I can take that guy out, if I can take that husband out, if I can lead that dad astray, if I can just take him out, I have a chance of taking out the whole family, everyone connected to him. I have a chance of wrecking their view of not just the family, but of God. And that's why men, if you can be 8 or 88, but you have a role and you have a responsibility to fight for true masculinity that rejects passivity and walks towards responsibility. See, when you open up the pages of Scripture, you'll discover our role is to cultivate and keep and care for and defend and guard and watch over and secure and preserve and protect and fight for everything and everyone connected to us. What the world needs now more than ever, what our country needs now more than ever, and what our families need now more than ever is men who would rise up, and men who would stand up, and they would cultivate, keep, care for, defend, guard, watch over, secure, preserve, protect, and fight for everything and everyone underneath their care. Men who would reject passivity and walk towards responsibility. I mean, don't you think that might solve like 90% of the problems that we're facing right now in our country? If men were known for how they modeled and how they fought for that, I mean, I do. And the challenges that we're facing as a nation, I'll just let you know, they're not new. In fact, way back in the 1700s, different culture than ours and a different country than ours, Edmund Burke, he said this, he says, the only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is that good men do nothing. And you know what that means? It means the world has always looked for men to take a stand, to rise up for what's right. The world is desperately looking for their dad to show up. Men who would stand up and rise up and cultivate and keep and care for and defend and guard and watch over and secure and preserve and protect and fight for everyone and everything connected to them. Men who would reject passivity and walk towards responsibility. Men, that's why you're breathing air this very second. But before I keep going, I need you to know that I stand in front of you as not as someone who gets this right all of the time. In fact, in life, we'll get these little reminders that no matter what our best efforts are, we just still fail. About 8 or 9 years ago, I asked my son to clean his room. And as he was cleaning his room, he was sorting through some papers, and I found this list. And it said Dad right at the top. And so I picked up the list, and I was feeling pretty good because Dad was right at the top of the list. And although we taught him God was supposed to be first, I'm not going to lie and say it wasn't heartwarming to see dear old Dad at the very top of my little boy's list. And after a little more cleaning out, I found some more papers, and I asked my son, hey, buddy, what's all these papers? What's all this about? And he said, Dad, I was creating a list of all of my friends, and I was ranking them in order. And so I began to look at the list, and I realized that I was at the top of the page, but I was definitely not at the top of the list. I noticed something that right beside my name was the number 47. I was the number 47. And my first thought is, this kid doesn't even have 47 friends. And my second thought was, Jesus is 53. I've completely failed as a father. And so I stand here not as somebody who gets it right all the time, but I'm not as the example, but I want to point you to the example. So men, if you struggle with getting it right, what it means to be a good dad, I can stand here today and say, me too. You're not alone. And men, I know that you have a difficult task, a never-ending assignment, a great responsibility, but you have a role and you have a responsibility assigned to you by God. Now, everyone who isn't a dad needs to realize that we don't get to go to boot camp to learn how to be a dad. We don't do special drills, we don't run and figure out how to be a better dad. And the reality is sometimes we haven't always had the best examples. Honestly, many of us are just doing the best we can. And many of us are doing better than our dad did for us. Men, what the world needs now more than ever is for men and young men to have their fathers to stand up and fight for them. So today, I want to share with you a pep talk that God had with someone in Scripture. This person had an important task in front of them, and he was going to have to fight. And to understand the challenge, you have to understand his story. Right? He had a lot in common with the oppressed today. In fact, he was born a slave in Egypt. He had been whipped, he had been beaten, he had been forced into slavery. He had never been socially acceptable. He could be bought and sold as property. He was never officially trained. He was never officially educated. He had humble beginnings, but he also has a lot in common with our first responders. He was looked to protect. He was looked to act. He was looked to direct the people. And he was a leader. He was a husband. He was a father. And he was a warrior. And he conquered 6 nations and 31 kings. And this person who was created and had a role and a responsibility given to him by God, he had a huge calling placed on his life. But what he was facing in front of him was an obstacle. It was a barrier. It was a wall. Well, now the challenging thing is that when we look at his life from our vantage point, we can see how God used him. But in the moment that we're going to look at today, all he sees is obstacles. He didn't know how the end of his story was going to go. We're looking at the life of Joshua in the Old Testament. And in this moment, God was calling him to defeat the Amalekites, the Amorites, the Hittites, the Jebusites, and the deadliest one of all, the Cellulites. Just kidding on that one. But that's not in the Bible. But in this moment, God was calling him to lead his people to the promised land. And the first step was to go to war against the great city of Jericho. And our boy Josh is depressed. And in the text, we find out how God gives a pep talk. And I believe from this pep talk, we can all benefit from this. And I think we can all have some areas in our life where what's in front of us, it seems too big. What's in front of us, it seems too difficult. All of us have these areas in our life where we don't believe that we'll ever fully be prepared for what's next. And that's exactly where we find Josh in our text today. The job in front of him seemed too big for him. The task before him was overwhelming. The enemy had stood up between him and who God was calling him to be. But the God who was with him was bigger than the enemy. He was bigger than the task. He was bigger than the battle. And so this hero of the faith is at a low point. And so God steps in and gives him a pep talk. And if you have your Bible or mobile device, please turn to Joshua chapter 1. And as you're turning there, you need to realize that in this time was a period of transition. Moses had led God's people for the last 40 years, and now Joshua is leading God's people. Joshua had been given the responsibility to cultivate, to keep, to care for, to defend, to guard, to watch over, to secure, preserve, and protect, and fight for God's people. And the obstacle in front of him, it was huge. And Joshua, he's discouraged. I mean, can anybody relate to that? If you can, just hit the heart or like button. And so God steps in and says this to Joshua: be strong and courageous, because you will lead these people to inherit the land I swore to their ancestors to give to them. I've given you a role. I've given you an assignment. You have a special job to do, but the very first step towards accomplishing this is to be strong and courageous and trust in my promises, because I promised you this land. Now that's verse 6. You got to check out verse 7. It says this. It says, be strong and very courageous. It's like, God, you already said that. And God looks at him and says, yeah, I know. I had to say it again because I know how you are. I know how quickly your courage evaporates. I know how quickly you get depressed by your circumstances. And isn't that just like us? That we are encouraged when we're gathered together, but in like 10 minutes or 10 seconds later, something happens or hits our life and we're like down in the dumps. We're convincing ourselves that this whole thing won't work out. And maybe something happened to Joshua between verse 6 and verse 7. So God has to remind him again, be strong and very courageous. Be careful to obey all the law my servant Moses gave you. Do not turn from the right or to the left. So God is saying here, I know there's a lot of things trying to grab your attention. There's a lot of things trying to pull you off track. Stay focused. Don't get distracted. You have been given a job to do. You've been given an assignment. You've been given a lane. You've been given a purpose. You have a role, Josh. You have a responsibility. I specifically created you and strategically placed you in this moment to lead my people, the people I've entrusted to you. And then God, he turns it up a whole other notch and he makes this pep talk a command. Look at verse 9. He says, have I not what commanded you? Be strong and courageous. It's like, okay, God, what's that look like? Okay, God says, don't be afraid and don't be discouraged. But here's why Joshua could trust the command and the reason why you and I can trust this command. He says, for the Lord your God is what? He'll be with you. He'll be with you wherever you go. And so God's people are on their way to the promised land, and right out of the gate, God hits them with this difficult challenge, a challenge in leadership. And if I was God, I think it would have been better to try to tackle the big city before Moses died and then get them used to this new way of living. Not only that, God tells them to cross the Jordan. And normally it wouldn't have been a big deal. But we read in Joshua chapter 3, verse 15, that the Jordan is now at flood stage. To which you're like, really, God? We're wandering in the wilderness for 40 years. And in your perfect timing, you ask us to cross a river at flood stage? Not only that, as soon as they crossed the river, the next thing we read, I'm telling you guys, it would have been a deal breaker for most men. This is at that time, the Lord said to Joshua, make flint knives and circumcise the Israelites. I'm like, peace, I'm out. Can you just imagine Joshua talking to God? Like, God, come on. Moses just died and you want me to tell them in what? Like we have to do the what to the what? Like, God, come on. Man, if you were in the tent that day, like you would have said, God told you to do what? I don't think so. I'm out. Like Moses would have never asked us to do that. Like, why did God have to take Moses? Why couldn't he just taken you, Josh? Not only that, Joshua has to be thinking, God, you want us to go into this land that you're going to give us. And we got to be prepared to fight hand-to-hand combat against trained warriors. And we're just the first generation of freed slaves led by a shepherd in the desert. Great! The camp out here is defenseless, and the only able-bodied people in the camp are the women. And the hits just keep on coming. God stacks one challenge against his people after another. And they're about to attack the oldest continually inhabited city in the world. In fact, it's still standing today. That's why they had the time to build all these really big, thick walls and put together an army of well-trained giants. We learned in the book of Numbers that when they were scoping out this whole thing, that the people who lived in the land are strong and the cities are fortified and very large. And moreover, we saw the descendants of Enoch there. And the descendants of Enoch were a mixed race of giant people. And they described how big they felt next to these giants. He says, we seem like grasshoppers in our own eyes. Oh, but there is more. God stacked against his people the walls of Jericho. Now, the outside walls were at least 6 feet thick, and the inner walls were known to be 12 feet thick. And both walls would have stationed guards on top of them. And remember where they came from. Wandering in the desert for 40 years. They didn't bring with them a catapult factory. Like the walls were huge, the people were huge, and the Israelite men were just limping along because they just had surgery. And it had to feel like they couldn't catch a break. And some of you might feel that way right now. I just can't catch a break. Many of you are facing challenges right now where there is no way you're ever going to fully come out of this in your life. Maybe it's health news that you've received, or maybe it's a relationship that seems beyond repair, or maybe it's just a person that you're trying to reach out to, but you just can't get over the wall. But in the text, we learn something about God. He knows our weaknesses. Did you know that? He knows our weaknesses, he knows our challenges, and he knows our future. And before he even calls us, and you know what that means? It means our excuses have no effect on him. So this is a never-ending journey walking with God, because at this moment in history, Joshua is 85 years old, and he's still fighting, he's still kicking, he's still leading. And if you're not dead, God's not done with you. See, when it comes to how you are called to cultivate, to keep, to care for, to defend, to guard, to watch over, to secure, to preserve, and to protect and fight for those in your care, every week it's going to be a fight. The fight's not going to go away. And doesn't it feel like sometimes that God is stacking the deck against you? That when you face those walls in our life, we think there's nothing else that we can do. We think if God really wanted me to do something about that, he would make it easy for me. And the problem that I want to attack today is that when we feel God is stacking the deck against us, we stop short. We stop short of his promise in our life. And no matter what you struggle with, no matter what you can't stop doing, I want you to know that I believe in you. I believe that God has empowered you. I believe that God has positioned you. I believe that God has gifted you for this time in history to rise up in this world gone crazy. I just don't want you to stop short. I don't want you to stop short of God's promise over your life. And maybe this is for you today, but I feel God wants someone out there to know that you're closer than you think. I mean, how many of us realize that in impossible situations, they're not intimidated to God? I mean, he proves it time and time again all throughout Scripture. And the reality is, the sign that something is tightly shut up in your life might be the sign that not that you're not going to get in. It just might be the sign that the enemy knows that he can't keep you out much longer. That God is with you, that God is for you, that God is calling you to rise up and to be strong and to be courageous. See, the challenge in front of you is smaller than the God who is with you. So rise up and be strong and stand courageously. Reject passivity and accept responsibility. Rise up and cultivate and keep and care for and defend and guard and watch over, secure and preserve and protect and fight for everyone who's positioned under your care. And so I want to talk to you about 3 things in the passage that get people to stop short of their promise. And the first one is this: your perspective gets blocked. See, in the book, Joshua highlights the very first battle the Israelites would fight to possess the land that God had promised to them. And when we face difficulty, we think, God, why is this happening to me? But instead of realizing that there's always going to be a problem standing between God's promise over your life and your possession of that promise. We don't talk about this a lot in church, but we experience it every single day. I mean, we act like God promised it. We should just get what he promised, like as soon as we say it. But that's not how we experience it. I mean, sometimes all we see are the walls in front of us. Sometimes all we see are the gates. And the text says this. It says the gates of Jericho were secured and barred. They were on lockdown. It looked like the city was going to be impossible to get in. And if they had allowed that perspective to block their promise, they would have stopped short. They would have stopped short of what God was doing. You see, your difficulty is not a sign that it's not working. In fact, Scripture reveals in chapter 6, verse 1 of Joshua, now the gates of Jericho were securely barred because of the Israelites. It was because of what God had done through the Israelites in their past, before this moment, that caused these gigantic people of Jericho to go on lockdown. That they had heard how far God had brought them, how God conquered Egypt and pulled them out of slavery, and they walked with them through the wilderness and through the Red Sea and through the Jordan. Because of how far God had brought them, big bad Jericho went on lockdown. No one went out. and no one came in. You see, some of the walls that are closing you out is just really a sign that your enemy is scared of you. And in that moment, they knew what was standing between them and the promise was a wall. And so we find out that this city is tightly locked up. And then we see God says something really, really comical, actually. He says, "Then the Lord said to Joshua, see, I delivered Jericho into your hands, along with its king and its fighting men." Here's why this is funny. It's like, God, not really. You see, God, we're on this side of the wall, and we need to be on that side of the wall. Other than that, minor detail, God, you've got this. And God says, no, I've given you the victory. Now walk in the victory. And God still does that today, doesn't He? He stands outside of time and He speaks of what has not happened as if it has. God is doing that right now in your life. He looks at you, and because of the blood of Jesus, He says that you are holy and you are blameless, that you're His child, that you are more than conquerors, that you really can be a good dad, that you are a strong man, that you are a man of God, that you can do this, that you can make it. And if you're not dead, God's not done. In fact, He goes, I'm confident of this, that He who began a good work in you, He's going to carry it on to completion. That's what God says about you. And that means when your life feels tightly barred up, the walls are closing in, God says, don't let your perspective get blocked. Don't let your perspective cause you to stop short of God's promises. Now, I've given them into your hands. And so here's the question. What do you do when what you see doesn't look anything like what God said? How are you supposed to respond when the preacher preaches about joy and you're still depressed? I mean, what are you supposed to do when there's a gap between what you expect and what you experience? I think the enemy loves to use problems to block our perspective. And so there they are at Jericho, a small city with huge, high walls. In fact, the Jewish historians tell us that in this time there are only 5 ways to deal with a walled city. But God is about to give His people a strategy that has nothing to do with any of those 5 ways. And I'll tell you why. Because sometimes in order to be victorious, you have to be willing to do something ridiculous. Sometimes to win the battle God's way, you have to do something that doesn't make sense to your friends or your family. Don't let the walls in your life block your perspective. That when you face the walls in your life, you have 2 choices. You can focus on the bigness of your walls, or you can focus on the bigness of your God. The choice, it's yours. Confront the walls in your life. Fight for the difficulties in your life. Stand up for the people in your life. Not from who you are, but who God is. And the question is, not how big am I, how strong am I, how brave am I, but how big is my God? And when you do that, your circumstances don't change. Things don't become easier when you make that leap. No, that's not what happens. But when you change your perspective, you can change hopelessness to hope in any and every situation. See, our second problem that causes people to stop short of their promise is your progress isn't always obvious. You see, in the text we discover that God said to Joshua, you have a big enemy, you have a big wall, and you've never been through this walled city before. I know what it looks like, the deck is stacked against you, but here's my plan. Look at the instruction God gives Joshua in verse 3. He says, march around the city once with all of the armed men. Do this for 6 days. Have 7 priests carry trumpets of ram's horns in front of the ark. And on the 7th day, march around the city 7 times with the priests blowing the trumpets. And when you hear them sound the long blast on the trumpets, have the whole army give a loud shout, and the walls of the city will collapse. Remember, Joshua scattered the city 40 years ago, and I promise you this, that when he thought of taking the city, not one time did it ever cross his mind as what I really need to take down the city is a marching band. I mean, you can just imagine going into the battle and the other side has swords and you've got your trumpet. Like, you're like, what are you gonna do if you don't surrender? Like, if you don't surrender, I'll swear I'm gonna blow this horn at you. I mean, sometimes the way God does things, they just don't make sense. Sometimes our progress, it doesn't seem obvious. I mean, if I was God, and I'm not, by the way, but if I was God, I would have set up this miracle like a game of Tetris. Like any old school Tetris gamers out there, like every time you went around the wall, the wall, 1/7 of the wall disappears, right? But God says, carry a trumpet, and I want you to march. And for 6 days, nothing happened. 6 laps, nothing happened. What was God teaching His people? Joshua, I want you to walk it out, even when it feels like it isn't working. I want you to lean on my promise even when the deck is stacked against you. I want you to walk with me, especially when it looks like nothing is happening. And the question for our lives today is, will you do what God's will is, even if it doesn't work for you? Will you forgive even when you don't get forgiven in return? Will you continue to trust in God's will and God's way even when it looks like it's futile? If we had immediate results, I mean, it would be different, wouldn't it? I mean, think about it. If I was praying and praying and praying for something, and while I was praying, it happened, if my prayer came true every time I started praying, I would never stop praying. I'd wake up in the morning and pray all day long. I'd be walking around town bumping into people. I'm sorry, I was praying because if my prayer got answered the minute I prayed it, you wouldn't be able to stop me from praying. But here's the problem. Sometimes I pray and nothing happens. And I think God wants to know, will you still pray? Will you still be faithful to me? Will you still walk it out even when you can't see me working? Today in your life, will you take another lap even when nothing moves, even when a brick doesn't fall from the wall, even when there's no progress that's evident? I mean, it's hard to keep working when you don't think it's working, but God says, maybe I don't want you to know that it's working because there's a deeper work that I want to do in you. Maybe the reason I let you walk around the wall and see no results is because I want you to be less focused on the outcome and more focused on your obedience. Now here's the life lesson. Outcome is God's responsibility. Obedience is our responsibility. But the problem is the progress isn't always obvious. But the act of marching, the act of obedience, even when they didn't understand, was training them. And so Joshua calls the people who are going to be doing the walking, and in verse 7 it says, and he ordered the army, advance, march around the city with an armed guard. And in verse 10 it says, but Joshua had commanded the army, do not give a war cry, do not raise your voices, do not say a word until the day I tell you to shout, then shout. And sometimes the best strategy is just to shut up and march. Sometimes the more you talk yourself out of God's promises. Sometimes the best strategy is to be faithful and just march. Now, you need to realize that Joshua, he did not tell the leaders God's plan. He gave them instructions, but he didn't tell them how long they would have to do it. I mean, wouldn't it be nice in your life if God would just kind of let you know how many laps you have left to win this race? See, Joshua has this knowledge because he has a conversation with God and he's thinking to himself, just 6 more days and we're about to kick some Jericho tail. I mean, we're going to win the Lord's battle. And on second day, he's like, 5 more days and we're going to in and get what's ours. But the people who are marching, they didn't know that. They hadn't heard that. Look at verse 11. He said, so he had the ark of the Lord carried around the city, circling it once. Then the army returned to the camp and spent the night there. Now imagine you were there. You're one of the soldiers and you left that morning with your sword on and you come home that night to your wife and kids. I mean, just can you imagine that conversation between the soldier and his wife? It's like, how did it go today, sweetie? And every married man knows this, that the translation of that means open up your soul and tell me everything you did today, along with what you ate and how it made you feel. Then don't forget to ask me about how my day was, and I'll be ready to listen attentively and remember everything. So just imagine you come home and she says, hey, sweetie, how was your day? Did you kill anybody today? I mean, and did you go get them? And you're like, not exactly. I think Joshua just wants us to get a vision for the city. We're just like scouting it out. And so we walked around the city. Okay, well, what'd you do after that? We did a cool down lap and we came home. Look at verse 14. So on the second day, they marched around the city once and returned to the camp. Now, it's one thing to march around the city once to get a feel for the city, but they did this for 6 days. I mean, can you imagine the conversation the soldier is having with his wife on day 5 or 6? I mean, talk about things like God's never going to show up. They had to have been the laughing stock of Jericho. And you know what's funny? Life is like that. Life doesn't tell you 15 more seconds or 1 more day. Life doesn't tell you just hang in there until the end of this year. Life doesn't tell you your breakthrough is just around the corner. So when you follow God, that He's given you this promise, your job is to march and you march and you march and you wonder and you think, I can keep marching. I just need to know how many more laps I have left. I can hang in there, but I just need to know when will it stop hurting like it hurts. I can keep going, but I just need to know when God's going to show up, because the problem with this is the progress isn't obvious. And the third reason the people stop short of their promises is because the process is open-ended. I mean, it would be one thing if life was like a NASCAR race. At the bottom of the screen, you can see how many laps you have left. I mean, and if you've ever watched the race, as if the number on the screen wasn't enough to find out where you were, when you're ready for the last lap, what do? They wave that little white flag and then to let you know that this lap is the last lap, so you better get moving. I mean, if you can make it around the lap one more time, the race is done. But life doesn't wave the white flag, and so we wave our white flag and we give up, not knowing that just around the corner, just around the next sacrifice, just around the next bend, just around the next season is the win, the victory. And so don't give up. See, the reason I don't want you to stop short living out God's best life for you is because you might be on lap 6 and not even know it. Just like God's people, you might only have 7 laps to go and you might be so close. I mean, wouldn't it be a shame for you to quit? I mean, when you're this close, wouldn't it be a shame to walk away when you have to come this far? Wouldn't it be horrible to quit when you're just this close to victory? And I don't know what difficulty you're facing or what you're going through right now, but don't stop on 6. I think, well, why doesn't God knock down the walls in our lives in the very first lap? Wouldn't that be more efficient? I mean, come on, God. But God says, not until you've taken 6 laps. Because I need you to know that once you get inside your promise, who brought you there? That if I didn't make you circle it, if I didn't make you walk around, if I didn't make you circle those walls, you would think it was your shout that brought the walls down because you're so good. But you wouldn't be prepared for my promise. So don't give up. You might be on your 6th lap. Wouldn't it be a shame to walk this far and fight this hard just to give up on lap 6? I mean, you know what you need to do is pick yourself up one more time. Stand up one more time. Keep walking and don't stop on 6. Don't stop on 6. Keep marching. Keep trusting. Keep leaning on God's promises. Now, something I realized as I was looking through this chapter, as you look back at what God has His people go through, He's not stacking the deck against His people. He's not stacking the deck against you and me. God is stacking the deck against His promises over our life. See, when God calls you holy and you know you're greedy, when God says you're chosen and you know that every important person in your life has left you, when God says you're more than conquerors, but you've been beat up financially, emotionally, maybe even physically, what's God doing? I mean, He isn't stacking the deck against you. He's stacking the deck against His promise over our lives. The problem is somewhere in our lives, we know we don't measure up to His promises. And so we stop short of His promises and we blame God for when it gets tough, instead of realizing that if we just trust God, even when it doesn't make sense, even when it looks silly, even then we're walking around this whole thing, He's not stacking the deck against us, but it's His promise. And so we can know that it was Him who showed up. In fact, in the book of Hebrews, it says it was by what? By faith, the walls of Jericho fell. After the armed army had marched around them for 7 days. And I'm not sure what lap you're on right now, but don't focus on the walls and don't you focus on what lap you're on. You have to realize that God is bigger than your fears, and God is bigger than your doubts, and God is bigger than your regrets, and God is bigger than your guilt, and God is bigger than your shame, that God is bigger than what you see. So we need to take our eyes off of who you are and place them on the one who saves, the one who never breaks a promise. Don't stop on 6. Just keep walking. Just keep walking. Just keep marching. That in the middle of your battle, just keep marching. In the middle of your difficulty, just keep marching. In the middle of your despair, just keep marching. See, the enemy is not going to keep us from the promise that we're going to fight for our kids. We're going to fight for the love of our wives. We're going to serve God in my generation. I'm going to complete the calling that God has placed on me. I'm not going to back down. I'm not going to stand down. I'm not going to shut down. See, what this world needs now more than ever, and what our country needs now more than ever, and what your families need now more than ever, is men who would rise up and cultivate and to keep and to care and to defend and guard and watch over and secure and preserve and protect and fight for everyone connected to them. Men who would step up in true masculinity and reject passivity and walk towards responsibility. And who knows, it might be your 6th lap. Don't stop on 6. I mean, wouldn't it be a shame for you to walk this far, to fight this hard, only to give up on your 6th lap? You know what you need to do is pick yourself up one more time, stand up one more time, and keep on marching. Don't stop on 6. And if it's not 6 or even 7, here's my advice. Act like every lap is your last lap. Act like every lap is your last lap, and then one day you will be right. but get up and keep on marching, and don't you dare stop on 6, because we have a promise that he who began a good work in us, he's going to carry it on to completion. Don't stop on 6. God is true. He keeps his promises. You didn't come this far to quit now. You didn't go this far to give up on what God is doing in you. And since the opening of this camp in 1942, Camp Atterbury's had a motto, "We are ready." And during World War II, this facility trained over 500,000 men. Today, you have a role, you have a responsibility. Are you ready? See, way back in the beginning, when God's people were sitting at the edge of their promise, at the beginning of this whole thing, God gives you the same words that I want to leave you with. Have I not commanded you? Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid. Do not be discouraged. For the Lord your God will be with you wherever you go. Don't you dare stop on 6. Would you pray with me? Father, I know that there's so many walls in our life, there's so many enemies in our life, there's so many difficulties coming at us. And we could be male or female, we could be young or old, we could have all of this diversity in our life, but this message rings true in us, that there are things that are keeping us from the promises that you have of our lives. And so many of us are just standing on the edge of our promise. And so, Father, as we lean into you, as we trust you, even when it doesn't look like it's working, as we keep on marching, even when it doesn't feel like anything is moving or anything is happening, Father, I pray that this week that you would draw near us as we draw near you. And that as we keep on marching, as we keep on leaning on you, that you would help us to see the victory. And Father, I just thank you that the victory that we have in Jesus, who is the reminder that we have a solid foundation for all of these promises. And may we live differently, because we don't stop and we don't give up and we trust your word. So in Jesus' name I pray. Amen.
Sometimes on this journey, get lost in my mistakes. What looks to me like weakness is a canvas for your soul. My story isn't over, my story's just begun. Failure won't has found hope. Love is on the move when the Father's in the room. Prison doors fling wide, the dead come to life. Love is on the move when the Father's in the room. Miracles take place, the city will find faith. Love is breaking through when the Father's in the room. Jericho walls are quaking, strongholds now are shaking. Love is breaking through when the Father's in the room. Said love is breaking through when the Father's in the room. Lay your enemies down. Here in the Father's house. Take the chain out the top. 'Cause anywhere you can go. You're in the Father's house.
Margie and I love listening to our online services from home. We love it, but we'll be glad when we get back together again. While we are the church everywhere we go, we are also the church in a very spiritual way when we take communion together, even from our separate homes. The praise team sang about our Father's house and the love that is found there. I wonder often how God, that created the universe, can love me. What does a perfect God love look like? Well, Father's Day gives me a glimpse of His love by how I love my kids, and especially my grandkids. God loves me much more than that. So much more that He gave His Son Jesus to suffer and die for me, so that I might find righteousness at the foot of the cross. What a gift of His love to creation. How can you understand what God's love is like for us, and how can we do something in response? I've always taught that when you read your New Testament and you see the word love, you should put the word show in front of love, and then you will know what He would want you to do. Try it sometime. Right now, let's show God that we remember how He loved us by sending Jesus to die and then to be resurrected. And that's our Lord's desire, is that we spiritually unite this morning by taking communion. As you take the juice and the bread, be reminded of God's love for you and your family as He gave of Himself so that we might be saved.
True masculinity rejects passivity and walks toward responsibility. Men, we've been given a role, we've been given a responsibility to fight, to protect, defend, and serve, to not back down in the face of the enemy. We owe it to our families, to everyone around us, to stand our ground, to be strong and courageous. But we don't have to do it alone. God is bigger than all of our fears, all our doubts, all our past mistakes. We can lay those burdens down at His feet. Sure, it may seem bleak, it may seem hard right now, but maybe you're on your 6th lap. God is true to His promise. Don't give up. Just keep fighting for what God has for you. We want to thank you for tuning in with us today. If this message has helped you in any way, please consider partnering with us financially to live out our vision of connecting people back to God. If you're on Facebook, please help us continue to reach others by sharing this video to your page or by tagging friends' names in the comments. If you're watching on the website or the app, consider sharing the link with someone you know who needs to hear this message. And just a reminder that this service will be on demand in its entirety on Facebook, YouTube, the Victory app, and on our website, victorycc.life/watch, immediately following our Sunday 10:30 service. If you need more info on what your next step might be, any information about Victory, or just someone to pray for you, we have Next Steps volunteers in the chat right now ready to talk to you. Just reach out through a DM or on Facebook, or hit that live prayer button if you're watching on the app or the website. And finally, make sure to stay connected with us on social media pages on Facebook and Instagram, and on our YouTube channel as well. Again, happy Father's Day to all our dads watching this today. If you haven't entered the giveaway yet, go do that now. The link will be open 5 minutes after service ends. Victory, we don't go to church. We are the church. Have a great week.